All right, people. So today is one of our treat days. We have a guest lecture. Actually, we have a double treat today. Remember, this evening is when you get Rashomon. So 7 to 9 in the room right across there. Whoops. Right across there. And each of the sections has different potentialities for what you can do with it as extra credit, and it is not required. Another announcement, oops and mea culpa, for the study question that asked you about idiot compassion and said, reader? Well, one alert person discovered that, yes, I had omitted this time. I was fixing up the readings, and it's one of Choyam Trungpa's most famous phrases. It has kind of gotten into the spiritual community. But the readings that had it in it are not in your reader this time. So it means what it sounds like it means. Okay, and apologies. And thank you. Now, Jennifer is a student here in our social psychology program, and she is specializing in working on Western psychological research on compassion, which is, you've now learned enough that you can realize how tricky and difficult it is to do that kind of research. So she's going to tell you about it today, and she's going to lead your 5 minutes of meditation. We are now starting the last, this is the home stretch of our class. This is the implications of everything. And so for this part of our class, now we've had meditations in each part that go with the tradition, the part of Buddhism that we're studying. And now the part is freedom and up to you. So any of the meditations we've done that you liked, go ahead, do it. If you have your own meditation that you like better and you've been a little annoyed all along and I have to do these things, go ahead and do your own. It's up to you. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to get us started. So as I'll try not to speak too loudly. I tend to actually speak very loudly. So with the microphone, I may be overly amplified. My name is Jennifer Getz. I'm a graduate student here at Berkeley in the social personality area. And Eleanor gives me more credit than is due. I actually don't completely study compassion. I study under Dr. Keltner and Kai-Ping Pong, and I work on culture and emotion. So I'm really interested in how emotion looks across different cultures, how it is sort of that both evolution and culture work together to create this thing called emotion. And one very interesting aspect of that is emotions like compassion or sympathy or empathy that are very social and very related to cooperation, which is obviously a very important thing in evolution and in culture. So she asked me to come kind of give you the Western scientific view of some of the things you've been studying. I think for some of you this will be a shock. It's pretty decontextualized from what you've been doing so far. It may not look at all the same, but we will see. So, however, I thought I would start with a recent quote from the Dalai Lama. And actually, I think that one reason that Buddhism has become so popular of late is that the Dalai Lama is so he's very present in popular media, and he puts out quotes like this that sound like something that appeals to all of us. It's something that compassion is in all of us. Cooperation is something really important to human nature, and that sounds like a nice thing. So it's not a bad thing to study. I thought I would start with a few definitions of what is empathy, sympathy, and compassion. When we talk about these in everyday life, we may think of them as very much the same thing, or we may think of them differently. Especially if you're studying Buddhist psychology, you may start thinking of compassion as a very different thing. But I thought I would lay them out in terms of scientific definitions. Something that you guys have probably talked about in meditation, but that psychology also studies is perspective taking. And this is psychology thinks of this as a very cognitive process. So it's the consciousness of putting yourself in someone else's place and seeing the world as they would, or having an idea of what their life is like, or what a situation might be like. So it's you guys putting yourself in my place and imagining, what kind of you guys all look like, or me doing vice versa.
this actually really helps with the next step, which is empathy. And this is really meant to be a very emotional experience, a vicarious experience of someone else's emotion. It is not specific to any one emotion. So empathy itself is actually not an emotion. It's more a capacity to experience someone else's emotion. So if you're feeling joy, if I'm experiencing empathy, I too will feel joy. If you're feeling sadness, I too will feel sadness. So from a psychological perspective, we don't actually consider empathy an emotion, more a capacity or something like that. Sympathy, however, we do consider an emotion, and compassion is almost exactly the same thing. So right now in the literature, people, when they talk about sympathy or they talk about compassion, they're generally talking about the feeling, noticing that someone else is suffering or in pain and wanting to alleviate that. So it's a very other-oriented emotion. It's really about how that other person is feeling, and it's really about a negative stimulus. So that person is suffering, that person is in pain, that person may be sad. The stimulus itself is negative, but the feeling or the behavior that comes out of it and the actual feeling of sympathy is not negative. So it's actually considered to be somewhat positive, and the behavior that comes along with it is usually positive. So you reach out and touch, you soothe, you may soothe with your voice, or you may actually have behaviors that are very concrete in terms of helping. The behavior is very wide and broad in terms of its possibilities. So I'm really going to talk about these last two, sympathy and compassion. This last definition, by the way, is from Dick Lazarus, who used to be in our psychology department and has done a lot of really interesting work on emotion. All right, so what is an emotion? This is from a purely psychological science perspective. So this is not meant to tell you what emotions are in your life. This is probably not what they are. But from a psychological science perspective, we consider emotions to be both social and functional. They have roles of communication. So if I feel sad, that communicates something to you. I'll have an expression, I'll cry. If I feel anger, that too will have a clear expression and will create some sort of response in you. They're also functional. So the fact that I show anger elicits a response in you that I probably want, right? And it's something that probably evolved through a process of natural selection. So things like fear, especially, are very easy to think about from an evolutionary perspective. And it's one of the least social emotions, actually. So fear, the minute I feel it, I have a coherent response where blood goes to my extremities so that I can run away. And I show this kind of expression on my face. Maybe I'll scream. That's the communication aspect. But you get the realization that people who feel fear are more likely to survive when being attacked by a lion than people who don't feel fear. The process for other emotions is a little more complicated, but that's one to think about. Like I said, these are coherent responses. So since they're evolved, we have systems in our body that kind of link completely together. You can think of it almost as a circuit. There's going to be cognitive parts of it. So I see something that I believe is dangerous to me. It has an affective component. I feel fear. I can actually tap into that. Motivation, I will want to run away or leave the situation. And behavior, I will probably actually run. I wanted to point out a couple differentiations. Emotion is considered, at least in the scientific literature, to be very different from mood and very different from attitude and personality. We consider emotion to be a very quick experience. It can be less than 10 seconds in general. Whereas something like mood, like you woke up this morning, you felt kind of, out of sorts, or you weren't really that excited about being in the world, that's a mood. There's no specific stimulus that caused it, and there's no specific target that you're going to sort of orient it towards. Also, moods are not necessarily as coherent. Attitudes. People think about things like hatred, especially in terms of like bloodlines or sort of these feuds, or in terms of war. Hatred, there is sort of, at least so far, science has labeled something that they call anger. That's an emotion. That's sort of this instantaneous feeling. But hatred is more like a broad attitude towards another group or something like that. So it's something much broader. It includes beliefs about the value of other beings or subjects or something like that. And personality. So if I'm like an extroverted person, I may tend to be happy a lot, but it's not an emotion in itself. It may be a disposition towards feeling certain emotions. Okay. All right. So what are the questions we're interested in when we study emotion and compassion? The main questions we're interested in are, when do we feel it? So what situations are likely to elicit something like sympathy or compassion? Who do we feel it for? Do we feel it for just anyone, or are there certain people who are perhaps related to us that we're more likely to feel sympathy for? Are there certain characteristics in people that will elicit compassion in us? Who tends to feel it? So this is sort of the personality aspect. Are there some people who are more likely to feel compassion or are more oriented towards that? As an emotion, what does it look like? This should include body and brain responses. It should include facial expression and behavior. And then perhaps the most interesting question is, why do we feel it? So why has evolution sort of spit out this emotion called compassion or sympathy? Why is it so important to our structure of society? I thought I'd show you guys some pictures that are actually, for me, really kind of elicit compassion in myself, and also identify some of the key properties that elicit compassion in the lab. Sadness, when you see other people feeling sadness, when you see them suffering. I'll show you a couple of them. I hope these don't disturb anyone. Sorry. Okay, that's a happy one. Okay. So a few of those. Wait, I want to talk about a couple. So I thought I'd do this one because it's a happier compassion. This is a situation where perhaps the puppy was suffering, but it's already been helped. So maybe you're feeling compassion, but maybe more vicarious compassion. The interesting thing about compassion, as you go through these slides, there's a few things that elicit it, and a few things that are very closely related. A lot of the elicitors of compassion are actually really hard for us to deal with. So suffering is not an easy thing to look at. So compassion is also very closely related to fear, or a more personal version of fear, which is called distress. We call it personal distress. And a lot of times when we see people suffering, we orient it sort of towards ourselves, and we become like really freaked out by it, and we want to get out of the situation. So this may happen. Some people have a lot of trouble volunteering or being in situations where people are suffering a lot because they get really worked up and upset by it. They don't feel like they're able to cope with it. So actually, there's a whole line of study looking at compassion versus distress, which is quite interesting. I'll tell you about that. Another thing that people tend to feel also is disgust. Compassion for people who are suffering also tends to include situations like homeless people or something, or people who are suffering and are sick. And these are things that are either very close to death or are very dirty or something like that. And it's really hard for people to actually sometimes feel compassion in those situations, and disgust is often elicited. These particular slides were chosen to try and elicit compassion more purely in a broad range of people. But you may find you react to them differently than other people. Okay, so when do we feel compassion? Well, Aristotle thought about this a long time ago, but he didn't call it compassion, he called it pity. It's really interesting if you read Barbara Barbara Nussbaum wrote a book in 1996, and she talked about compassion as an emotion. It's a really interesting review of philosophy and things like that, and talking about compassion if you're interested in it. And she reviews Aristotle's views. He called it pity, and pity is really, back in his time, really was compassion. It was a painful emotion directed at another person's misfortune or suffering. And when he talks about it, it sounds like what we were talking about. He believes that it has three sort of requirements in order to feel compassion. You have to believe that the other person really is suffering and that it's serious. So if a baby drops their lollipop, you're not likely to feel full-blown compassion. You know, you may feel bad when you may pick it up, but they're crying over a lollipop, it's not a big deal. So the suffering needs to be serious. And the more serious the suffering is, probably the bigger the compassion response. The second thing, and this is really important later in research, is that the person is not to blame for their own suffering. So if someone brought that suffering upon themselves, it's less likely you'll feel compassion or sympathy. Depends on the words you want to use here. And then he also says that it requires that you can somehow relate to them, that you can see that you could possibly be in the same situation, or that you could see, you could sort of humanize them and see them as similar to you. Okay, suffering and blame. So here's an example of an experiment that was done to follow up on the concept of responsibility or blame. Imagine you're a teacher. It's probably not too difficult for you to do. You give an exam and one of your students fails. When they ran this experiment, they actually asked them to imagine they were a high school teacher. One of your students who fails, her name is Jennifer. She is very lazy. She never does her homework or pays attention in class. And although you know she is a bright student, she really has never put any effort in. The second student who failed is Simone. She's an exchange student. She just transferred right before the exam. She missed a lot of lectures and really couldn't make up the material in time, so she also failed. So there's two aspects of suffering and blame that are mentioned in these stories and that the experimenters tried to manipulate. The first is controllability. So did the person have control over the cause of suffering, over the cause of their failing the exam? In the first case, Jennifer is lazy, but she's bright, right? So probably she could do well in that exam. She's just not doing anything about it. So she has control over that situation. However, being new to the class, that's not really in their control. The person, you don't know if they could do better, but possibly they could if given the chance. And then another version of this, or another variation they did, was they looked at how stable the cause was. And what they looked at was, is it something like constant laziness, or is it like, oh, sometimes a little bit of a flaky student, and so they'll do well once and then they won't do well the next time. And I just mentioned that so that you can understand the results. Well, what would you guys predict? So for the student who failed because she's lazy, what do you expect the response to be? Low compassion. Are there any other emotions you might expect? Okay. And then for this new student, the student that is new to class, maybe some compassion, maybe, yeah. Well, they didn't. The graph I'm going to show you is not specifically compassion. It's actually helping and encouragement versus punishment and feedback, negative feedback. What they found was that in the green here is the controllable, and the lower it is on here, the more punishment they gave. So what they found was that the lazy student, and then they also had another student who was flaky, they both got punished or negative feedback in addition to failing the exam. And then students who were either not very bright or were new to class were actually helped and encouraged. They were offered, like, please come by my office and we will talk more and I'll help you with this, those kinds of things. When they looked at this more closely, they found that the teachers who said, they actually asked real teachers these questions because they're actual high school teachers and they're in these situations all the time. And they found that the more, in these stable conditions, in the controllable conditions, what they found was that the teachers tended to say they felt sympathy and compassion and they were then more likely to help. And then in the, I'm sorry, the other way around. The controllable conditions, they are more likely to feel anger, like you said, frustration, and they're more likely to punish. And they say that they do this because they're trying to get the child to sort of snap out of it or work harder. Like the punishment isn't sort of this utilitarian thing. Whereas in the other conditions, you do poorly because you're not very bright, or you do poorly because you missed a lot of classes. Then they offer help and encouragement. So this is a really interesting part of the literature that anger and sympathy are actually very, very similar in their stimuli. So the situations that bring them about are very, very similar. Basically, you need a negative event. Then, whether you feel anger or sympathy has a lot to do with how you think about the event, right? So how you interpret it. You could interpret an event many, many different ways. It's not always based on sort of facts. I mean, the experiment I showed you, there's not a lot of room to move around in. However, in the real world, there's a lot of room to move around. And really, it depends on how you approach the situation and what you think about the other person. If you think they're responsible for their suffering, that they brought it upon themselves, then you're more likely to feel anger and punish them or not help them. And if you feel